What's up, guys? How you doing? This is Dan here with Cigar Salute. I hope all my stateside friends had a happy and safe 4th of July, and I hope all of my Canadian comrades had a happy and safe Canada Day last week. I want to thank all you guys for the tremendous support that my YouTube channel, my Instagram, and all of my comrades here who have joined up with Cuban Exchange 2.0 on Facebook. I want to thank all of you guys for subscribing and following and joining up with the content that I generate and participating in the community that we are building at Cuban Exchange 2.0. You guys have been a marvelous addition to the community, and your presence is felt, respected, and appreciated tremendously. Just very recently, this channel here on YouTube has now amassed over 700 subscribers. Considering that at the very beginning of 2019, I think this channel barely had 100 subscribers, maybe about 120, 150, something like that. To see that this channel is now holding over 700 subscribers is a huge deal to me. Okay, that may not mean anything in the real world where, a kid who plays video games gets, 50,000 subscribers. But for our little corner of the world here in the Cuban cigar community, 700 subscribers to me is a big deal. Almost all of my recent videos have reached over 1,000 views, some of them in the 2,500 to 4,000 numbers, and that to me is simply humbling, truly humbling, and it shows me that I am moving in the right direction with this channel. So I want to thank you guys one more time, and I will continue to do my best to deliver relevant and useful content for you guys. I apologize for some of the time that it takes to get some of these videos out. As you know, that I go for the long form style, and I try to cram as much information as I possibly can into a feature, and I also design a feature to accompany you while you are smoking. And I've been dealing with a lot of changes lately, really good changes, just stuff that's been occupying my time. Despite COVID-19 still raging on, I've been working a lot the last 6-7 weeks, and gone from doing flat 8-hour days during the quarantine and lockdown portion of COVID-19 to doing 12 to 14-hour days at work. And also, my girlfriend moved in at the end of May, so I have been spending a lot of my time, my available free time anyway, rearranging my apartment and cohabitating with her, and it's been going great so far. And I actually got her to indulge in her first cigar experience a few weeks ago. It was a 2017 Monte Cristo No. 4, and I was so proud of her when she actually took that first puff and said that she picked up floral notes. And oh man, my heart was beating a little faster after that, to say the least. So without further ado, let's get into tonight's feature. Okay, so some of the current events to discuss real quick before we dive into our topic of the evening, or afternoon I should say. First things first, okay, COVID-19. It has been a giant pain in the ass for all of us who order our cigars from overseas, and it continues to do so. All right, I would advise any of you guys who have a issue with waiting extended periods of time, and I am talking extended, okay? I have had viewers contact me that they got their order after 60 days, someone as high as 75 days, and there's a whole lot of 35 to 45 or 50-day waits from when they ordered their cigars to when they showed up on their doorstep. And then I'm also hearing about folks who placed an order and then got it in the mail 2 weeks later. It just seems to be a complete and random crapshoot as to when you'll receive your order, if it is traveling through EMS in Europe or USPS coming to the States. I would advise any of you guys who have the option to use a private courier for shipping that you do so, or otherwise just stay on the sidelines and pinch out of your collection until the time is right. That also brings me to the next point. Cuba has had difficulties exporting cigars to get them to the distributors for them to get to the retailers, which means that out of stocks are becoming an increasing occurrence, and prices, not only have they gone up due to a annual price increase from Havana SA in May, they have also gone up from retailer to retailer at variable rates due to the difficulty in obtaining more stock. So don't be surprised if you are perusing your favorite retailer and you see that they are out of stock on quite a bit of stuff, way more than usual. Okay, and that's even the gray market retailers that have the ability to procure stock from other distributors. The licensed retailers that operate within the Habanos SA guidelines, forget about it. You know, it's just not a good time right now for the cigar collector, and it is not a good time right now to be a retailer, I would imagine, with dealing with constant customer emails and complaints and dealing with restocking issues and whatnot. But hopefully you guys that have a good stockpile at home, hopefully you guys have enough to weather the storm. I would imagine that within the next month or two, this is really going to start to die down, and you know, the market always finds a way to correct itself. So solutions will be found. Be patient. I would say hold off on grabbing that box of unicorns you've had your eye on for a while. Wait a little while longer, because not only will you be possibly paying a higher price than normal for it, you may also be risking having it sit in transit in the dead of summer for an extended period of time. So let me use this opportunity to remind you guys how important it really is that you freeze treat your cigars. If you don't want to do it, that's your choice. But I recommend that you do it, because not only is the box of cigars sitting in transit at high temperature for extended period of time, even if it wasn't, just in general, you have no idea what conditions those cigars were exposed to from the time that they were freeze treated initially before export and the time that they hit your doorstep. Okay, that's just my 2 cents. You guys do what you will, but just know that if you want to know how I do things, that entire tote behind you and that entire wine door behind the tote that you see has been freeze treated. Okay, it makes too much sense to do it, not to do it. Okay. Next, let's get into a little bit of viewer frequently asked questions that have been popping up in my email the last couple of months. Okay. So, first off, let me just get it out of the way. Everybody's favorite subject of mine, finest Cuban cigars. I get 2 types of emails about finest Cuban cigars, and I'm not sure, maybe YouTube is placing the thumbnail for my video in the search results or something, or I'm not sure what's prompting this video to reach a much wider audience than it initially seemed to. But I've been getting a lot of emails from individuals who have recently placed an order with finest Cuban cigars, and then I guess while their order's in transit or when they get their order, they find my finest Cuban cigars roast feature that I did and dropped on this channel about just over a year ago. And they're like, holy shit, what the hell did I just spend my money on? So I'm getting emails from folks who are sending me photos of their cigar boxes, showing me bands, showing me cigars, showing me, serial numbers or whatever. And they're asking me if they're good. pictures can only determine so much. All right, guys. At the end of the day, unless there's a glaring error in a photo, I can only determine so much from photos. From what I've seen in the photos, things look all right. A few people may have gotten lucky. Maybe Finest Cuban Cigars isn't sending out any fakes right now, but who knows is my point. Okay? Here's the thing. We dropped that video. I dropped that video last year, and, I detailed a lot of things that Finest Cuban Cigars got wrong in their counterfeit Cohiba. Now, that video is viewable by anybody. I know Bill from Finest Cuban Cigars has a social media presence. I know that he checks out the cigar channels on YouTube. He could have just as easily watched that video and fixed all the mistakes that I listed in my roast feature last year and then created a superior counterfeit product to what he had already. Hopefully he's not that stupid, but I don't put anything past the man. That goes to say, that segues into the second type of email I get in regards to Finest Cuban Cigars, and that is the newcomer to the community who probably doesn't have a lot of information on retailers and got the name Finest Cuban Cigars from somebody who wasn't necessarily aware of their current reputation or wasn't necessarily aware of any other retailers. Maybe they heard that a retailer was shipping to the States and got excited. And for whatever reason, they see my video and they're not dissuaded at that point yet from ordering from Finest Cuban Cigars. So they reach out to me and they ask, Dan, I know you found what you found about Finest Cuban Cigars and the Cohibas, but I don't really care about Cohiba. I want to order a box of A, B, or C. Do you think I'm safe if I do this? Or, Dan, I know Finest Cuban Cigars has the reputation that it does, but, I really don't like to buy boxes. I like to buy singles. I'm thinking about placing an order with them. Do you think I'm safe if I exclude Cohiba from the list? And my answer is this. No, I don't think that it's safe to order from Finest Cuban Cigars ever again after any sort of period of time, no matter what the photos look like of the cigars that they're sending out, okay? I don't reward the kind of behavior that Bill and Finest Cuban Cigars exhibited with a pardon when they never even apologized to the cigar community or admitted their wrongdoing to begin with. And even if they did, why would I recommend them ever again, or say that they are safe to purchase cigars from ever again, when they wasted and stole money? Not even just, they only stole $60 from me when they sent me 3 fake cigars on the test order, which I don't give a fuck about, okay? What I do care about is the viewers that I sent to Finest Cuban Cigars and said, these are the guys I use and they're safe. And they go and order a $500 box of Cohiba and they come back and send me photos like this. How could I, in good conscience, ever risk getting an email or a picture like this ever again? It will not happen. It will not happen. I will want to see those guys out of business every single day that they are still selling cigars, okay? And it's gotten to the point where their name is tarnished so much in the Cuban cigar community that they are now reaching out to some of the female cigar influencers on Instagram who cater to a different audience than the Cuban cigar community, who cater much more to the American market, cigar market. And they are trying to use these influencers to promote their website to an audience who does not yet know about their bad reputation. Okay, now, me being the guy who likes to be on top of things, I maintained following Finest Cuban Cigars Instagram profile this whole time. And I know a few of you guys did as well, because I've seen some of the comments that you guys left. Anthony and Adam Baroni, I'm talking to you guys. Those guys put up a box of Cohiba Robustos on Instagram, and Adam Baroni goes, "Are you guys doing this to prove that you don't sell fakes?" Man, you guys crack me up sometimes. I'm so proud of you guys. I really am. That was beautiful when I seen that. I almost spit my coffee out at work when I seen that. But long story short, I reached out to these excuse me, Instagram influencers, and one of them got back to me, and she thanked me for informing her about, what I had told her about Finest Cuban Cigars, and she removed the promo photo from her Instagram profile. And if I see anybody out there in the cigar influencer community or anything like that, or cigar blogging community promoting Finest Cuban Cigars, I will forever be telling them about what we found, because I don't want anybody ever to get a box of bullshit ever again. And I don't want businesses to think that it's okay to get away with selling counterfeit product for a period of time, and that they could just stop doing it and go back to business as usual, because that's not the way it works, or that's not the way it should work anyway. And I don't believe that people like that should be pardoned. Okay? So please, if you're watching this right now and you are looking to buy singles, and maybe friends of Habanos, or another retailer that sells singles, because there are other retailers that sell singles. I can't talk about every single retailer on this channel. You guys, once you join up with the Cuban cigar community, you will find access to more retailers and more avenues where you can procure singles, and you are not bound to purchasing by the box. So please keep that in mind, and please just, if you're gonna purchase cigars from Finest Cuban Cigars, you do that at your own risk, and I don't want to know anything about it. I don't care if the cigars are beautiful, if they taste great. If they do, good for you. I'm happy for you. But the Finest Cuban Cigars and this channel, the two shall never meet ever again in terms of friendly terms. I have nothing good to say about them. I never will. And they can do whatever they want, but as long as they stay away from my viewers, and they stay away from me, and they keep my name out of their mouth, in terms of, because Bill was using Cigar Salute and Dr. Joe show to defend his bullshit reputation on various cigar vendor review platforms, or whatever. As long as he doesn't tell people that I recommend his business or anything like that, then that's it. I'm just going to be staying away from them. But the only reason I'm bringing this up now is because it's been brought to me in emails several times in the last couple of months, and I've resisted talking about it on video, but I feel like it had to be said because somebody was very persistent, asking me a ton of questions about Finest Cuban Cigars last month, and admittedly, they got under my skin a little bit, because to me, it's just, it's such a hard no in my book, that it baffled me that this individual was willing to overlook so much wrongdoing from a retailer that there's really no advantage to doing business with. There's no price advantage, there's no availability advantage, there's no shipping advantage or anything that would make them an appetizing choice outside of their ability to sell singles. But there are other retailers that do this. So, okay. Now that I've gotten that out of my system, let's get into the bulk of what we are going to be getting into tonight, which I find to be extremely fascinating, and I hope you guys do as well. So, we know that on April 27th, 2020, Imperial Brands, aka British Imperial Tobacco, sold their 50% stake in Habanos SA, among other things, to two Hong Kong-based holding companies for $1.3 billion. Okay? So a lot of people are wondering, what does this mean? What does this mean for the future? Does this mean that, China is going to get all the good stuff and the rest of the world is going to be left with scraps? Does this mean that, prices are going to go up? Does this mean that Cohiba will never be seen again outside of China? A lot of people are asking questions, and this really kind of gave me the idea that we should perhaps look to history to see what might come of this new deal that was just announced, which isn't technically in place yet. My understanding was that the sale won't be finalized till third quarter this year. Okay, so we're not quite there yet. But in this feature, we are going to talk about how the Cuban tobacco industry changed from the time that Castro took over in 1959 to the present day. Now, unfortunately, I do not own the the Encyclopedia of Post-Revolution Cigars by Min Ron-Nee, which is probably the most comprehensive work and photo-intensive work available on anything Havana cigars from 1960 to early mid-2000s, whenever the book was first printed. And I believe there is a revised edition out there, but either way, this book is upwards of $1,000. And I understand it's a man's life. It's the life's work of a man and his passion project. And I understand why it has such high value and why it costs what it does. It was a huge, tremendous undertaking, and I think that in the future, maybe I will get the book. But for now, it's not practical for me to obtain the book. But with layman's resources, aka Google, I was able to highlight several major events over the last 50 plus years of Cuban tobacco history that really kind of shaped the industry into what it is in 2020. And we will discuss those events, and we will discuss major events in Cuban tobacco, especially starting from the mid-'80s on. Okay, admittedly, I don't have as much information as I would ideally like for the 60s and 70s, but really they are just being covered to give a good foundation to what we build up to starting from the mid-'80s on. So if you guys are interested in hearing about this, I would love for you to join me in this conversation, and we will be back in a moment. Welcome, guys. So I just want to issue this little disclaimer. This is not an utterly comprehensive discussion of the history of Cuban tobacco post-revolution. Okay, I am going to be highlighting some events that took place, but if I neglected to speak on something, I sincerely apologize. Okay, but I'm going to do my best to treat this with the respect and integrity that it deserves. I find it incredibly interesting, and I have always found Cuban tobacco and the mythos surrounding it and the lore surrounding it to be extremely interesting and fascinating to me. I think some of the things that set Cuban tobacco apart from some of the other countries that are known to be prominent tobacco producers, like in Central America today, is that, you know, the leader of the Cuban Revolution, the late Fidel Castro, it's almost impossible not to associate him with being a cigar connoisseur and a lover of cigars. From a purely cigar connoisseur point of view, Castro was a legend, okay? And cigars are often cast into the lore of the Cuban Revolution with photos of Che Guevara and Fidel Castro and their top lieutenants all smoking cigars. And obviously, the story of Cohiba is a completely separate entity, but that factors into this as well. If you guys find this subject matter to be interesting to you, I highly recommend that you watch Dr. Joe's brand history video on Cohiba, because he speaks in depth on the creation of Cohiba and some of the lore surrounding the brand and some facts that you may or may not have known about Cohiba. And I believe that that is the most comprehensive brand history on the Cohiba brand that anybody's ever done. And it is one of my favorite Dr. Joe Show episodes. And if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend that you do so. It is a 4-part series available on YouTube. It was released, I believe it was like May or June 2014. And I still go back and watch that one every so often just because it was so well done. And if you guys have not checked out the Dr. Joe Show, if you enjoy Cigar Salute, then you will definitely enjoy the Dr. Joe Show. I cannot give that man his due credit enough. So, without further ado, we are going to talk about the Cuban tobacco industry from the time of the Revolution up until the late 70s. Okay, so the Cuban Revolution happened. And on January 2nd, 1959, Fidel Castro took power. Okay? Now, initially, the first year or two that Castro is in power, nothing really changed just yet for the manufacturers of cigars and whatnot. Okay? It really took a year or two for the changes that were coming to start to show. Okay, and as the revolution happened, and the time leading up to the ousting of Batista, some manufacturing, the families behind the manufacturers and whatnot for major industries, not just tobacco, some of them had already fled to the U.S. at this point, and some still remained. Okay, it wasn't until 1960 when the changes that were coming started to show, and there was a period of disorder where some factories were just left abandoned as the Cuban government began to appropriate certain lands and businesses, assets, property, intellectual property, and factories. Okay, and the big thing here is the National Institute for Agrarian Reform, which, in one broad stroke, in many industries across Cuba, but as it pertains to us, the tobacco industry became centralized. And by 1962, the Empresa del Tabaco formed the organization of Cuba Tobacco, which still exists today. Okay? But back then, Cuba Tobacco owned all the trademarks for the brand names. They expropriated it. All right, it was formed in 1962, and it took on the responsibilities for all marketing, distribution, as well as manufacture and production of Cuban cigars. Okay, now in the early 60s, this is when you start to see the brands resuming production under the current state-controlled monopoly. Okay, and the Cuban cigar industry begins. The first thing that they do, aside from centralizing production and seizing the factories and the intellectual property, is that they stop exporting raw tobacco to the United States. They stop exporting their best tobacco anywhere. Okay, and when I say tobacco, I don't mean finished cigar products. I mean that prior to the revolution, they estimate that about 80% of Cuba's best filler and wrapper tobacco went up to Tampa or other cigar-producing regions, or cigar assembling regions, I should say, because the American cigar industry was strongly built on the back of Cuban tobacco in the early 20th century to the mid 20th century. That's pretty much what there was. Of course, there was select Dominican cigar brands and stuff like La Aurora and everything, but who even knows what kind of presence these companies had in the U.S. Havana was the game. That was the game in town that people worked with. That was the tobacco that people wanted to smoke. And that's really, when you thought of cigars, you thought of Havana. Okay? So it's important to understand that the first thing that happened when Castro took power and the tobacco industry in Cuba, the first thing that happened was they stopped sending their primo leaf abroad to be assembled elsewhere. Cuba kept its best wrapper and filler tobacco and started rolling the best cigars for themselves to export, for themselves to enjoy. Okay? So the embargo, the American embargo of Cuban cigars and Cuban products and services in general occurs in February 1962 after increasing hostilities between Castro and the U.S. and the embargo immediately cuts about 2/3 of Cuba's cigar business, and Cuba needs to find new markets in order to sustain their tobacco industry. Okay, so this helps establish abroad. There was 2 more Cuba tobacco offices that were opened in the Netherlands and Spain to help promote and distribute Cuban cigars throughout the world. All right, so this lays some of the foundation into the working with local tobacco distributors in various countries, working with the Cuban government to distribute and promote their cigars, which is not that much different than the way it's done today. When you think about it, this is like the basic skeleton of that network. Okay? Now, the 1960s is a very turbulent time. All right? The U.S. government, as well as individuals, Cuban Americans or exiled Cubans who owned property, both intellectual and otherwise, back in Cuba, are angry from having their life's work stolen from them, and they are angry that they're losing out on that money. They are angry that they've been forced from their homeland. U.S. businesses are angry at all the money that they're losing, and there is a third entity that is very angry, and that is the mafia. Okay, now part of my research in the process of doing research for this feature, one very interesting thing that I came across was talk of CIA and mafia cooperation to assassinate Fidel Castro to facilitate the reintroduction of a pro-American government in Cuba. Now, if you have read about Cuba under the Batista regime, or you have seen The Godfather Part 2, which is Hyman Roth is supposed to represent Meyer Lansky, and you see that back in the 50s, Cuba was supposed to be some kind of vice haven where wealthy Americans and foreigners went to go down and, it was basically like Vegas before. I read some talk about the CIA contacting two mafia figures, Johnny Rosselli and Sam Giancana, about assassinating Castro, and it appears that the three men went into the three respective parties went into cooperation with each other, and there is even rumblings in these articles about all sorts of covert assaults that were all shot down by the Cubans. But the point I'm making here is that Castro, being a cigar connoisseur and a daily cigar smoker, it became unsafe for him to just, pick up a cigar at any old shop and smoke it, because the CIA, who are known to be James Bond level crafty with their assassination attempts, poison cigars. That's a very realistic thing to worry about in this time. And Dr. Joe discussed this in his Cohiba feature, but I believe that personally that this is part of what may have influenced Castro to commission Eduardo Rivera into creating the original Cohiba blend in between 1964 and 1966. Okay, and for the record, the first Cuban cigar brand that was created post-revolution is supposedly the Diplomaticos, which was meant to be an alternative to Monte Cristo. Okay, now Cohiba was quietly beginning to be produced in a former mansion owned by a sugar baron who also owned quite a few other industries. He had his hands in quite a few different pies. This mansion was converted into a rolling school for women first, and then it became what we know today as the El Laguito Cigar Factory, which is Cuba's most prestigious cigar factory. And at first it was a very secreted location where all Cohiba cigars, the private issue cigars for Castro, were produced. And that brings us to 1969, a very important year, and something that would come back later to bring a lot of controversy to Cuban cigars, which would be the introduction of Zino Davidoff into the picture. Okay, now Davidoff previously had his own line of Hoyo de Monterrey cigars that used Cuban tobacco in cooperation with Cuba Tobacco, and that was meant to help bolster cigar sales and revitalize their image in times when they needed the boost. Okay, but in 1969, Castro brings Davidoff down to Cuba, and he sees the El Laguito Cigar Factory. And as Dr. Joe discussed in his video on Cohiba brand history, Zino Davidoff wanted to buy the factory outright, which, if you understand Cuba's politics, that's not happening. And foreign investment of that nature, that direct of foreign investment, that's not happening. They don't want any foreign landowners. They don't want any sort of behavior that could be interpreted as imperialistic, where foreign powers are controlling the wealth. So they deny Davidoff the privilege of buying the factory, but they are very interested in working with him, and they do not want to lose that potential for revenue. So, born out of Laguito, in addition to Cohiba, is the Davidoff Cuban cigar brand. Okay? And also around this time in 1969 is the brand Trinidad being born. Now, I'm not going to dive into the conspiracy that Dr. Joe discusses in his video. That's really his thing, and I'll leave it to be his thing, where he talks about Trinidad possibly being the real cigar that Castro enjoyed, and the Cohiba that was created by Eduardo Ribera possibly being Trinidad, and that also Davidoff being the cigar that Eduardo Ribera created for Castro, just rebranded as Davidoff instead of Cohiba. But what we know is that in 1970, Avelino Lara, after Eduardo Rivera quit, was brought in to redesign the Cohiba brand shortly after Davidoff comes and visits Cuba and starts having cigars produced under his own name. Okay? That sets us up for the 1970s. Okay? So things are kind of resuming normalcy. You know, they've established a way of doing business. They've established relationships with important individuals in the tobacco industry around the world. They are getting used to living without American dollars. And a large portion of this is an entity that hasn't yet been brought up in this video, and that is the Soviet Union. Okay? Mind you, the Soviets are at the height of their power at this time. They are very large. They are a very large force in the world, and they are subsidizing Cuba in a fashion that I kind of, when I think about how they were kind of glazing over some of the holes in the economics of Cuba, I think of spackle on sheetrock, where all of the ugly little nailheads of the Cuban economy, or the failings of their ideas, are being glazed over with Soviet subsidies. So at this point in time, the tobacco industry in Cuba is doing well. They're doing well without Americans. Castro and the Soviets are kind of thumbing their noses at Nixon and whatnot. And in 1973, we see the introduction of the Quai d'Orsay brand for the French market. Okay, and we also see Monte Cristo and Partagas being introduced to new markets in Europe and France. All right, and this comes back later on, so keep that in mind. So things are resuming in the 70s. They're picking up. You're starting to see retailers across Europe introduce private label type vitolas, like special edition vitolas for a certain brand, and you're starting to see a lot of brand building take place. So you're seeing Cuban cigars compete against each other in the market in the beginning in the 1960s and 70s. And it's very interesting to see. Like, there's, you know, a Dunhill signature Monte Cristo, and then you have Davidoff's own line of cigars, and then you know, you're seeing new brands be introduced, and things are rolling along smoothly until we get to 1979. And right here is where we're going to take a break. I'll be back in a moment. Welcome back, guys. So, the year is 1979. And up until this point, since the current system that the Cubans had at this time was put into place, the kinks had been worked out, things were kind of normalizing. In 1979, the first major disaster that the Cuban cigar industry has to deal with since the implementation of post-revolution policies takes place, and that is the 1979 blue mold disaster, where blue mold, a disease which affects tobacco plants, wipes out their entire crop in 1979 and decimates almost all of the 1980 crop, to my understanding as well. Okay, in 1981 and 82, they are scrambling to get cigars produced to have available tobacco for production. The number of cigars produced in the early 80s was drastically reduced as a result of this. In 1980, all packaging that was deemed excessive and all poor-selling vitolas were apparently not produced, and so began the policy of the vitolas at every factory being united. So Robusto in this factory is the same as a Robusto in any factory in Cuba. Okay? So also during this period comes the policy that still exists today, where any factory can produce any cigar at any time. All right, there's no more Monte Cristos are only produced at this factory and El Rey del Mundo is only produced at this factory. No, any factory in Cuba can produce any marca and any given day. All right, I've gone over this a little bit in other videos, but it's important to know that this is why this policy came about. It came about in a time of crisis, and in the early 80s, it is said that Cuban cigars suffered a blow to quality because maybe tobacco wasn't aged as well as it was previously, and it was utilized earlier than it was really ready to be in an effort to produce the amount of cigars needed to hit a quota or whatever it is. But the point is that all this turmoil with Cuban cigars in the early 80s prompts a man that really, I don't know why he's not mentioned more. Honestly, I think that he should be, at least his photo should be up on the Habanos website, because this man did so much for the industry and laying the framework for the current Cuban cigar industry. And he, regardless of politics or anything else, we as Cuban cigar connoisseurs owe a lot to this man that I'm about to mention, and that man is Francisco Padron, okay, who passed away in October of 2009, but in 1984, he was placed, he was previously an economist prior to working for Cuba Tobacco, but in 1984, Mr. Francisco Padron is placed as head of Cuba Tobacco, and he is given free rein to do whatever changes he needs to make the ship sail smoothly, so to speak. Okay, and can you guess what the first change that this man made was? Okay, the first thing that this guy did was say, hey, if we don't have the resources to produce cigars at the quality that we should be producing them at, don't produce the cigars then. Okay, if we have less cigars to sell, we have less cigars to sell. These cigars are a symbol of pride and quality that Cuba can generate, and we are not going to kick out any horse shit. All right, and another obvious change that I would probably speculate with accuracy to say that Mr. Padron was probably responsible for, 1985 comes the introduction of factory codes and box dates. Not the same system that we have in place today. It's been revised several times since then, but prior to 1985, there was no direct way to look at a box outside of analyzing the seals and the type of seal that was used or the type of stamping that was used or bands or whatever. At this point, Cuba Tobacco started actually stamping the box date and factory code onto the bottom of the box, so one could just look and read it right off the bottom of the box. So to me, that's a very important thing, especially with the art of aging Havana cigars and the market that occurs today in vintage Havana cigars. Because of that box date, that changes the whole game right there. Okay, and Mr. Padron, with his economist background, continues to institute aggressive changes in the Cuban tobacco industry. And really, there's a couple of interviews that he did with Cigar Aficionado in the early 90s that really kind of gave me the background that gave me the confidence to execute this feature. Okay, and you can find these articles for free online on Cigar Aficionado's website, and it takes me back to a time where Cigar Aficionado was just a totally different magazine, and I would love it if they were still like this today, and not just a giant jizz rag for American market cigar companies to plaster advertisements all over. Excuse my language. But Mr. Padron decided that he was going to generate more capital for Cuba and generate more capital for the Cuban cigar industry to make the industry stronger. So what Mr. Padron did was, back before the Habanos SA current distribution system was in effect, there was in some countries multiple agents that served as distributors for Cuban cigar products. And what Mr. Padron did was find the strongest agent in every country and force them to become a 50% partner with Cuba Tobacco. They had to cut Cuba Tobacco into 50% of their business. And it was said that Mr. Padron brokered 240 contracts in one day. And the threat was that if these agents did not comply with the request, then they would not receive any future product. So Francisco Padron is responsible for introducing foreign investment into the Cuban cigar industry directly. Not an under-the-table deal like the Davidoff deal that he had. I'm talking about, consistent capital coming in on a regular basis. Okay, so that's very important, and it sets up the framework even more so for what we have today. All right, and it also, Mr. Padron, without saying so directly so much in these interviews, he kind of pointed at some things that really kind of shed some light on why Davidoff broke off from Cuba. And it makes a lot more sense than the stuff that we commonly find in a Google search or commonly hear in magazines or whatever about Davidoff and Cuba. Okay, so two things. Davidoff, as a Cuban cigar brand, Davidoff, the company, wanted to own the Davidoff name unilaterally in every country. They wanted to own that trademark. And that trademark was property of Cuba Tobacco in all but a few countries, apparently. Okay, Davidoff was vehemently opposed to this, and this was a large point of friction and conflict between Cuba Tobacco and Davidoff. Okay, and Davidoff will go on and on to say that the reason that they stopped working with Cuba was because of the decline in Cuban cigar quality. But if you speak to other folks in the Cuban cigar industry at this time, or other tobacco companies that, like importers and whatnot, like Heinrich Villager and whatnot, they will say that the quality of Cuban cigars at this time was incredibly high. All right. And it makes sense that what they're saying as opposed to what Davidoff is saying. I have a feeling, and this is me speculating, based on strong suspicion that the real factors involved with Davidoff's split from Cuba in 1991 had to do with trademark more than anything else, and also the fact that Dunhill left in 1991. Okay, now Dunhill is a British cigar company that had produced their own line of cigars in Cuba as well. Okay, now Davidoff and Dunhill were both claiming to be the best of the best for Cuban cigars. And mind you, at this time, that Cohiba was now publicly available, because we talked about Cohiba as Castro's private label cigar that was, that we all heard the stories that they were diplomatic gifts and yada, yada, yada. But what I neglected to mention, and maybe I should have mentioned it at the beginning of the chapter, is that in 1982, Cohiba debuted at the World Cup in Spain, and by 1984, it was available in world markets, okay? In 3 vitolas, the Lancero, the iconic Lancero, which that cigar is forever associated with guys like Castro. The Corona Especial, which you guys know is my personal favorite. And the Panatella. Yeah, the little Panatella. Those were the 3 original Cohibas that were released to the public, okay? And it wasn't until 1989 where the Esplendido, the Exquisito, and the Robusto hit the market. So you have Cohiba, which claims to use the best of the best from Cuba's Vuelta Abajo tobacco. And then you have Dunhill, supposedly also claiming to be the best. And then you have Davidoff, which is also claiming to be the best. So you have 3 cigar lines that are all claiming to be the best, that are all and there's only so much of the best tobacco. Which one really has the best if all 3 are claiming to be the best? And the Vuelta Abajo is not that big, guys, and there's tons of cigar brands. When I say tons, you know what I mean. There's about 30 or so, maybe a little bit more at this time. There's dozens of cigar brands that are pulling tobacco from this one region, and I think that there's only 10 total farms that Cohiba cigars can be made with, and they're only made with 5 different farms harvest at any given time. So who's using what? And how is this company going to claim to be the best when this company says they're getting the best tobacco? And how are either one of them going to claim that when the Cubans are saying that, El Comandante's cigar of choice, which Castro had quit smoking about 4 years prior at this time, in 1985, Castro quit smoking cigars in solidarity with the anti-smoking campaign that was going on in Cuba. But in 1989, I believe Dunhill announced around this time that they were pulling out of Cuba, and by 1991 they had exited the Cuban cigar market. And who knows, maybe Davidoff would have stayed despite the other misgivings if they had known that Dunhill was gonna pull out. Okay, you have 2 companies trying to compete for the same tobacco, essentially, and it's just not ideal for anybody except the Cubans, because they're getting the money regardless. But either way, Davidoff leaves Cuba in 1991, I believe it was. Maybe Dunhill left in 1990. I'm going to have to double check that. But either way, we're talking the same time period here, 1990, 1991. And I should also mention around this time, another accomplishment that took place under Mr. Padron's reign in Cuba for Cuba Tobacco is that in 1990, Max Gutman opened the very first La Casa del Habano in Cancun, Mexico. Okay, so the idea for the La Casa del Habano franchise was put into action in 1990. And all of these changes are taking place under the tutelage of one person. Okay, so I really think that this gentleman, Mr. Francisco Padron, deserves a lot of respect, and I'm very, very surprised that he doesn't have a cigar named after him or something like that. And it's cool. It's even cooler to me that he doesn't have something named after him that he imposed himself. It just shows a humility and a lack of vanity that a lot of other people wouldn't necessarily have today. So, despite Davidoff and Dunhill leaving, Cuban cigar sales are going strong in the early 90s, when tragedy befalls the Cuban cigar industry yet again, and the Soviet Union collapses. Okay? Now, why is the Soviet Union collapsing such a big deal to Cuba? Well, remember what I said earlier about the Soviet Union kind of being like the spackle over Cuban economy's sheetrock? The Cuban economy was reliant on those Soviet subsidies, and not only the cash subsidies, but fuel, food, resources, all these things that the superpower was giving to Cuba for strategic reasons. All of these things are now no longer coming their way. And this also creates another problem, which is an unforeseen consequence of this. Apparently, the Soviet Union collapsing and the disarray that followed that in individual governments in some of these nations, Cuba was getting supplies like cheesecloth nets and tents for their wrapper leaves. Because if you guys understand how cigar wrapper leaves are grown, they are grown under shade, okay, to keep some of the UV rays off of the leaves to give them a smooth and thin feel, as opposed to a sun-grown leaf, which has prominent veins and can be very toothy and whatnot. Back then, almost every Cuban cigar used a shade-grown wrapper. So when the faucet, so to speak, gets shut off on Cuba, this triggers something called the special period, which really didn't start to be felt by the Cubans until about 1993. And just prior to this period starting, the Cubans lost Dunhill and Davidoff, two of their most prestigious cigar brands. So in immediate response to the loss of Davidoff, under Padron's guidance, Cuba Tobacco releases the Cohiba Siglo series, the series 1 through 5, okay, which, if you look at them, they were the exact same vitolas as Davidoff's Chateau series, okay, and it was meant to replace the loss of Davidoff from the Cuban cigar repertoire, okay. Now, I don't know how similar these cigars were in blending, and I personally have not ever had an opportunity to smoke a Cuban Davidoff. And for those of you guys that are out there that are curious about them, guys that I know that have access to Cuban Davidoffs or own them themselves, the word is that they are quote unquote dead at this point, that they are not what they were at their apex. And who knows if that's true or that's just, some zealous collectors saying this to keep to keep hoarders off the track or whatever. Who really knows? But if you come across a Cuban Davidoff, odds are it will be a cabinet or a box, and you will not have the opportunity to necessarily purchase a single cigar. And if you do have the opportunity to purchase a single cigar, it will be well over $100 most likely. Okay, and that's stateside anyway. I mean, guys in Canada and Europe may be a little luckier because these cigars were easily attainable at one time to individuals that live where these markets are. So, but in the U.S., expect to pay through the nose for a Cuban Davidoff, and don't be surprised if it is not what you hoped it would be. At one time, Cuban Davidoffs were described as these orgasmic experiences that would bring you onto a whole new plane of reality that you had yet to experience prior. And that just one puff could turn you into a millionaire, and you'd be, kicking out just oozing machismo for the rest of your life, and women would get pregnant just from you looking at them, and you'd have to fight off a trail of beautiful models every time you stepped out to the store. And yeah, you get what I'm saying? Like, it's a cigar. It may have been a great one. It might still be a great one. It might be some of the best ever made. But don't beat yourself up trying to get one, and don't put yourself in situations that are extremely compromising or leave you vulnerable to getting taken in an effort to obtain one. My apologies for the tangent. Moving on. So, Cuba Tobacco releases the Siglo series. They are met to acclaim, and also around this time we have the introduction of Cigar Aficionado magazine. So, Cigar Aficionado magazine in the early 90s is probably one of the best things that ever happened to the cigar industry, both Cuban and otherwise. Despite it being an American publication, at the very beginning of Cigar Aficionado's creation, there was extensive coverage of Cuban cigars, as the owner of the magazine, Marvin Shanken, and his editors, David Savona and Gordon Mott, which I'm pretty sure they were there at the beginning as well, if I recall. I think the oldest issue that I have of Cigar Aficionado may have been the one with Jack Nicholson on the cover. But the one I'm really trying to get my hands on right now is the one with Rush Limbaugh on the cover, because that's the one that has an article that I'm getting a lot of this material from, an interview with Francisco Padron. I'd really like to see the hard copy of that article, because I'm pretty sure it came with pictures, and for whatever reason the pictures aren't loading onto my the digital readout of the article. And I'd really like to have a picture of the gentleman to throw up in the feature. It's driving me nuts. So hopefully I can locate that before this video comes out. If not, my sincere apologies. But so you have Cigar Aficionado coming out, which is generating even more American interest in Cuban cigars, because these Cuban cigars that are being talked about in the magazine are rating higher, significantly higher than the American market counterparts, and it further cements the mythos surrounding Cuban cigars. Don't forget, guys, back in 1992, most people in America didn't even have the internet, let alone knew about websites where they could go online and order Cuban cigars to discreetly deliver stateside. Okay, so trying these cigars made in this mysterious country that we're not supposed to like in the U.S., or that, they're supposedly the enemy, and blah, 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 and this. And by the way, guys, I've done my best to veer away from politics in this feature, and I'd appreciate that if you did that in the comment section as well. Politics is something I really don't care to discuss, regards to Cuba and whatnot. A couple of guys have tried to step onto this channel in the past and make political arguments and try to recycle the same old okey doke, and I don't really have the time or the patience to get into that discussion with people. If you don't like Cuba's politics, you don't have to buy their cigars, okay? But for the individuals that enjoy their cigars, just leave us to enjoy our passion, okay? It's none of your fucking business. Just stay out of it. But long story short, Cigar Aficionado creates in tremendous buzz around the cigar industry, both American and otherwise, which draws a great amount of interest to the Cuban cigar industry and Cuban cigars in general, just as Cuba is entering something called the special period, which we are going to discuss in a moment when we come back. Welcome back, guys. So, The year is 1993. Cuba has just lost Dunhill and Davidoff in the previous couple of years at the beginning of the decade. Okay? The Cubans got $9 million from Davidoff for the brand name in the markets in which Cuban controlled it previously. And Davidoff goes on to blame the end of that relationship on quality. Okay? Davidoff in 1990 set up shop in the Dominican Republic, and immediately the cigars are said to be inferior to their Cuban counterparts. Davidoff cigars today, obviously we know that Davidoff has carved out a reputation with its Dominican and Nicaraguan offerings that are considered to be delights in their own right, but many individuals still speak about the Cuban versions, as I said previously, with everlasting glee and reverence. But so the special period begins. It is a period of economic hardship that post-revolution Cuba has not seen. Okay, there are shortages of resources and food left and right. The Cuban cigar industry is in trouble because the capital and the resources are just not there to help them repair after a hurricane wiped out some of their most valuable resources, such as cheesecloth tents for wrapper leaf and fertilizer, fuel, things of that nature. Okay, the Cubans need this capital to get the ball rolling and to be able to even have a harvest. So Francisco Padron, who is such a brilliant man that a good leader knows when to accept that pragmatism is more important than pride. Okay, so a good leader will swallow their pride to serve his people better. So Mr. Padron goes to Tabacalera, who is the Spanish tobacco monopoly, and he asks Tabacalera SA for $25 million and asks the rest of his distributors around the world for a combined $20 million, for a total of $45 million to fund the 1993 Cuban tobacco harvest. And he gets his money, and the promise that was made to these distributors when Padron asked for this money was that they would be paying. It was basically payment for future cigars. Okay, Padron made good on his deals, and everything went off without that much of a hitch, as far as I understand, that I could deduce from the article I read. What took place after that seemed like stuff that probably coincided with the introduction of American versions of certain brands like Monte Cristo and Partagas into certain markets. Because don't forget, the U.S. is its own little thing, and Cuba has had that blocked off their map of the world for decades at this point, over 3 decades at this point. And now the American cigar industry is beginning to look east. They're beginning to look north. They're beginning to look elsewhere outside because of the expanding popularity of cigar culture due to the introduction of Cigar Aficionado magazine. Okay, so trademark battles erupt all over Europe between Tabacalera SA and Sieta, who is the French tobacco monopoly, regarding brand names like Monte Cristo, Upmann, and Partagas. Cuba claims that in the 1960s and 70s that these brands really weren't anything to write home about in the French and Spanish markets, and the Cubans claim that it's their hard work of marketing and whatnot that really made those brands the powerhouses that they were at the time. And, you know, it's just, it results in several brands being taken off the market in France. Talk about like Ramon Ayones, La Gloria Cubana, Por Loranaga, and 4 others. Okay. So the year is now 1994, and we have another big year in the Cuban tobacco industry. Excuse me. In 1994, Francisco Padron resigns as the head of Cuba Tobacco after disagreements with the government. And he retires from the tobacco industry and subsequently becomes a professor at the University of Havana, where he worked. And I'm not sure if he worked there until he died or if he retired first and then he passed away. There's really not a lot written about him after his time with Cuba Tobacco. But regardless of how he left and why he left, and I have a feeling, just my speculation, that he probably left because the Cuban government, there's always one arm of the Cuban government and there's always another arm of the Cuban government. And it's similar to what probably happened with Eduardo Rivera and Cohiba a few decades prior, is that Padron was very, very, very adamant about keeping the quality of the cigars very high, even if that means producing less cigars and making less money in one year in order to maintain that unimpeachable reputation about the quality of Cuban cigars. Whereas there's this whole other side that says, hey, you know what? These things are getting more and more popular. The Americans are having an explosion in cigar popularity right now. They're starting to show up in television shows. The actors are, you know, they're smoking them on the covers of magazines, and there's all these cigar bars popping up and everything, and that's causing a contagious effect throughout the world. Cigars are just becoming this huge, huge thing. We got to produce more of these things. We got to produce more brands. We got to produce this. You know, we got to take advantage. You know, people out there are hurting. We need money. And it's true. People needed money in Cuba in the 90s. You know, it was just, it's called the special period for a reason, because it was a real test to the Cuban government. It was a real test to the Cuban people, and a lot of people suffered under the effects of this special period. And, you know, food rationings, just you know, transportation, taking an old tractor trailer and fashioning it into some kind of like makeshift school bus to transport people and everything and whatnot. Just you know, you're seeing how resourceful people can be in the face of hardship, and it's very inspiring. And I have tremendous respect for the citizens of Cuba for persevering through such a hard time. So I imagine, in my opinion, from everything I read about this gentleman, Francisco Padron, my guess is that he was adamantly opposed to any increases in production, any introduction of new cigar brands, any sort of cutting of corners would have been met with a hard no by Padron. And my guess is that certain folks probably said to him, if you can't get with it, then get out. And that's probably exactly what happened. I don't have any proof of that. That's just from my gut feeling, from what I read about the gentleman to what I see in the industry, or what I've read about the industry at this time. Because you read in these cigar aficionado interviews, Marvin Shanken is not going easy on him, and he's interviewing him. He's saying, do you think we'll see some new brands? Padron says, no, I don't think you'll see that right now. No, what we got is good enough. No, we will not increase production. We'll do this. And then right after Francisco Padron resigns, comes Habanos S.A. in 1994. Okay? Padron resigns, and then Habanos SA is formed. And it takes from Cuba Tobacco the marketing and distribution responsibilities from Cuba Tobacco. Okay? Cuba Tobacco remains responsible for the brands and the manufacture and production end and the tobacco end of things, but Habanos SA steps in as the sales and marketing arm of the Cuban cigar industry. Okay? And basically, Habanos SA takes what Padron did, and they continue to carry that policy on, and the policy that was established with Padron's ideas, they take it and they start driving the train. Basically, the ideas that Padron implemented are still in effect today. You know, you look at the industry today. A country receives Cuban cigars from Habanos SA. Okay? These cigars are handled by a distributor who then, you know, depending on how large the market is or how big the country is or how many countries this distributor serves, they either distribute directly to retailers or they distribute to sub-distributors who then dispense the cigars to retailers and whatnot. Okay, but the cigars come from one source in one market. Every market is a monopoly, and every monopoly gets from the same exact source. Okay, so that is the framework that Mr. Padron laid down. That is how he got Cuban cigars to get almost worldwide distribution, and that is how they continue to be distributed today, through authorized agents connected to a monopoly. It is a pyramid, and it works very well. And obviously, the methods that we are able to obtain our cigars are due to certain holes in this setup, and that's why I'm thankful for the way it is, because if it wasn't this way, it might be more tough for guys like myself to get the cigars that I want. Okay? Because at this point, guys, somebody asked a question on the Friends of Habanos forum last week, I believe, and they said if you could no longer obtain Cuban cigars, like if they were, let's say, magically removed from the planet, would you continue to smoke cigars? How would your cigar smoking change? And I myself answered, and by the way, my name on Friends of Habanos is also Cigar Salute. Okay, I have I don't post there like regularly or anything like that. I don't promote my videos or my blogs. I don't promote them in Cuban Exchange 2.0, and I don't promote them on Friends of Habanos or anything like that. That's not what I'm there for. Okay. Really, my Instagram and my YouTube are kind of just separate entities from the rest of my cigar enjoyment, you know. And in community-based environments, you know, the way I see it, I'm a member of the community. I'm not trying to be, you know, Dan the cigar blogger or Dan this or Dan that. I'm just Dan the guy who loves cigars. And, you know, really that's all I am at the end of the day, you know. But before I go on too much of a tangent here, somebody asked if I would continue to smoke cigars. You know, it was on this Friends of Habanos post, and I myself answered that no. I probably would be an occasional cigar smoker at best, and it wasn't until I really started smoking Cuban cigars consistently that I developed the love for cigar smoking that I have today. And it was the decision to smoke almost exclusively Havana cigars that kind of pushed me into being the guy who became an everyday smoker. So that's just, you know, my feelings and whatnot. But obviously, there are still good American market cigars out there. But anyways, back to the task at hand here, guys. 'Cause I'm trying to stay on track here. There's just a lot of info to get through. So, Padron resigns. Habanos SA is formed. We talked about the structure and whatnot. And the year is 1994, and we are still in the midst of crisis for Cuba. And we are heading towards worse crisis, okay? Because we have Padron saying in 1994, before Habanos SA is formed, that you're probably not going to see any new brands. You're not going to see this. You're not going to see the production numbers go up and this, that, this, and blah, 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 blah. 1996, the Kawaba brand is introduced. Production goes up. 1997, Vegas Robena is introduced. Production has gone up. 1998, we have Trinidad finally being introduced to the market after Cigar Aficionado in 1994 hosts the dinner of the century, some charity dinner that they put together in Paris, and Trinidad cigars are sold there for a exorbitant amount of money. And Trinidad Fundadores hit the market in 1998, and prior to this, the diplomatic Trinidads are fetching as much as $750 for a single cigar in private auction and whatnot. So the Cubans obviously saw that the potential was there to generate the income, and they capitalized on it and released the Trinidad Fundadores to market, which that's all there was at the time. So, 1999, the San Cristobal de la Habana brand is introduced. So you have Kawaba, Robena, Trinidad, and San Cristobal. You have 4 brands being introduced. Oh, and Vigueros, also in the late 90s. The original Vigueros was introduced as well. You have 5 brands being introduced, and production reaching insane levels that were 3 times what they were in the around the time that Padron was heading Cuba Tobacco. I got the stats right here. Excuse me. I got a bunch of little sheets here. I probably should have printed this out, but that's just that's my fault. So, okay. So in 1990, Cuba produced 80 million cigars. 91, 77 million. 92, 67 million. 93, 57 million. Okay? Like I had said, that in 1993, a hurricane destroyed 60% of the crop. And in 1994, you have 50 million cigars being produced. By the year 2000, the Cubans were aiming to try and produce 200 million cigars. And we go from the special period to this takes us to 1998, and we're still in the special period, mind you. In 1998, we have something called the beginning of the Black Period, which lasted to 2001. And I have a feeling that Mr. Padron probably resigned from Cuba Tobacco in an effort to stop this from happening, because he knew the destructive power that to the Cuban tobacco industry that this would have. But we have the Cubans seeing the explosion in the U.S. It's known as the cigar boom, the period from 92 to 97, 98, where cigar smoking became extremely popular. I think at the height, there was 360-something million cigars being sold in the U.S. or produced in the U.S. or for the U.S. market or whatever. But the Cubans are trying to get in on this worldwide cigar boom. And don't forget that even as far back as the late 80s, early 90s, the Cubans were speculating that 6 to 8 million Cuban cigars were making their way to U.S. shores, legitimate Cuban cigars. Who knows about counterfeits, but I'm sure the numbers were high in those days as well. But, there's a cigar boom going on, and the Cubans have plenty of cigars, and they think that they could just, you know, put out any cigar made with any old horseshit tobacco that's not yet fermented properly, that's not yet, that wasn't blended well, that wasn't rolled properly. The Cubans were planting tobacco on land that really wasn't ready for it, for quality tobacco to be grown. They were being rolled by individuals that were poorly trained, inexperienced, and it showed. And this is why you can still find sometimes 1999, 2000, 2001 boxes at some vendors. And if you guys look on the collectible or hard to find section of a cigar vendor and you see 2000 or 2001 boxes, be very, 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 very skeptical of them, because it's quite possible that you'll get the box and at least half of the cigars may not be smokable, or they may be poorly blended, or they'll be hard as bricks. You'll find no shortage of horror stories from Cuban cigars around this time. And I have a feeling that very same 3-year period, called the quote-unquote black period, is the period of time in which Cuban cigars suffered what still today would be considered a poor reputation. American market cigar producers probably loved every second of this, and they probably are the ones who have perpetuated it to the point where you bring up Cuban cigars in an American market cigar form, and the first thing you hear about is, why would I want to spend money on something that's way more expensive, and half the cigars aren't even going to be smokable. But it was a real thing that did occur, the black period, and there was a period of time where Cuban cigars being produced were of poor quality, and they were not blended well, and they were not used with the standard and grade of tobacco that we would expect them to be used with. And it most definitely did hurt Cuba's reputation at a time when American market cigars were getting better in terms of blending, in terms of flavor, in terms of quality, in terms of reputation and prestige. You had things like the Ashton VSG coming out in the U.S., introducing, and you had the Opus X come out in 1995, and this was the beginnings of the American palate changing, desiring more of a strong, full-flavored cigar. And you're going to see that at this point, it was a real make-or-break moment for Cuba. And we're going to discuss how Cuba found themselves heading back home towards the legendary status that they have maintained today when we come back from break, okay? Welcome back, guys. So, we have Cuba in the late 90s floundering in bad decision after bad decision. And the quality of the legendary and coveted Cuban cigar, the legacy is crumbling right before their eyes and headed towards disaster. The industry is close to irreparably damaging its reputation. And we have in the background now two of Habanos SA's largest markets, Spain and France, colluding together. So you have Altadis being formed by combining Spain's Tabacalera SA with France's Siete. They form a merger to form Altadis. And in the year 2000, for $477 million, Habanos SA agrees to sell 50% of its organization to Altadis. And that cash infusion basically saves the Cuban cigar industry. Okay, it gives a liquidity injection that is necessary to get the ship steered in the right direction again. So, just judging by the changes that were made around this time, we can kind of deduce what happened when Altadis came aboard. The first thing that happened was a even more drastic culling of the vitolas that had already happened a couple of times, but if you look at Cuban Cigar website, which by the way is where I also got some information for this feature, if you look at Cuban Cigar website, you will see a pretty comprehensive list of vitolas that some of the major brands once produced that are now discontinued. And if you look, and this is why Cuban Cigar website is such a valuable resource to keep in your repertoire, because the information that's available there is just mind-boggling, and it's just such a tremendous body of work, and very, very grateful to the creators of that website and the contributors to that website, because it serves as such a valuable reference material. So you look at the Cuban Cigar website, and you'll see that so many vitolas between the years 2000 and let's say 2009, pretty much any obscure or poor performing vitola was axed from Habanos SA's catalog around this time. Okay, starting in the years 2002 to 2004, the quality of Cuban cigars recovered drastically. Some of the factories start getting draw machines added to them, which, people complain about the draw of Cuban cigars today, which honestly, like, if you own a perfect draw tool, and you keep your cigars at a reasonable humidity level, you're not really going to have a problem with any Cuban cigars, to the point where, like it was back then, where there was, guaranteed to be, almost guaranteed to be like a bunch of sticks in a box that weren't going to perform the way they should. People cry about burn issues and this, but most of it generally comes down to poor storage conditions or humidity issues. And there are some cigars that are kind of known to give more draw issues than others, and some factories that maybe roll a little bit tighter than others. But for the most part, when I buy, I'm a smoker of primarily cigars in the 38 to 46 range, and I rarely have a problem where a cigar's plugged completely. But back to the task at hand. So the first thing Altadis kind of does when they step in is, first off, there's their own board of individuals that coordinate with the officials at Habanos SA, and they have a say now. So any move that Habanos SA makes has to be coordinated with the Altadis representation. So this leads to some of the less practical decisions that Habanos SA wants to make to be axed, and this also leads to better economical decisions being made, and also more income generating ideas are being added to the catalog. Okay, immediately, almost within 2 years of Altadis stepping in, we see the introduction of the Edition Limitada program, okay, which is today a huge moneymaker for Habanos SA, and it has grown into the point where a box of 10 of a lot of Limitadas at minimum, the Cohiba Talisman 2017 Edition Limitada, 10 cigars, often selling for prices of $60 to $75 per cigar in most markets. In Cuba, you can find them substantially cheaper than that, but even so, you have the La Casa del Habano exclusive cigar range, like the Trinidad La Trovas, which, retail for about $27 a cigar minimum. Okay. You start seeing the addition in 2005 of the regional editions. Okay, so these are all formats which are boxes with low cigar counts but high dollar values. And they were not nearly as expensive back then as they are today. But the program, make no mistake that the program was designed to be the way it is today. It is a huge earner for the Cuban cigar industry, and it generates so much capital that it, in my opinion, takes away resources from the regular production catalog. I mean, how many La Gloria Cubana regional editions have there been? And how many regular production La Gloria Cubana cigars do we have out now? There hasn't been a box of Meta de Oro number 4s rolled in since supposedly the beginning of 2018. I think it might even be before that, like late 2017. I'm lucky enough to have just over half a box of April 2017s left. And probably around October or November of 2019, they just completely disappeared from the shelves of most online retailers. So you are not going to see, until they do another production run, if they do another production run of Meta de Oro number 4s. Hopefully they will, because other cigars that we kind of thought might have been lost in the sauce, like K. Dorsey Corona Claros. There's boxes coming out now with December 2019 box dates, when they hadn't been seen in the wild since November 2018. So, but you're starting to see resources being allocated strictly to the more popular Vitolas, and you're seeing a continuous culling of Vitolas. I have no doubt in my mind that that is the influence of Altatis and the the more capitalist influence that they have with Habanos SA. So we start seeing a dramatic culling of Vitolas. We start seeing a dramatic improvement in quality. And we start seeing lots of limited and rare batches of cigars being produced. And all of this screams American market cigars. Okay? And in 2008, Altatis gets bought out by British Imperial Tobacco, now known as Imperial Brands. Okay? So, as far as I can tell, from what I read and everything, and from the people who were around back then, because I didn't come into reading about the Cuban cigar industry till probably about 3 or 4 years after this. But as far as I can tell, it really didn't change much. It was just kind of like same shit, different name. One of those type of deals. But really, the Altatis infusion into Habanos SA in the year 2000, that's probably the single most important thing in the last 20 years that happened with Cuban cigars. Because if it was not for them doing that, then we may not have the same Cuban cigar industry that we have today. My opinion, if that didn't happen, we would probably have, like let's say in the years 2001, 2002, 2003, you probably wouldn't have had any Cuban cigars being released, maybe a couple. But after that, you'd probably see the global brand. Excuse me. I'm trying to get out so much information in a short period of time here. You'd probably see the global brands, and that's it. All the local brands would probably be done, and that's probably the way it would be if Altatis didn't step in. So thank you, Altatis, for throwing out that life preserver, because that single action saved an industry and quite a few amazing cigars. So 2008, Imperial Brands steps in, and they pretty much leave everything intact as far as I could tell. The same people who were there prior continue to do what they were doing. And that brings us to 2019, when Imperial Brands announces that they are looking to sell their premium cigar business as a whole. And we're going to get into that when we come back. Okay, guys? What's up, guys? So we're in the home stretch here, and we are now at the year 2019. Okay? And we are in Imperial Brands announcing that they are looking to sell their premium cigar industry. Now, why did Imperial Brands decide to announce that they were looking to sell at the time that they did? And what happened that may have triggered this? Because while I don't have proof of it, I am strongly convinced that Imperial's decision to sell a profitable business for them, a very profitable business for them, probably had something to do with President Trump's enacting of an old law that has been on the books for about 24 years now, and that is the Helms-Burton Act of 1996. Okay, and President Trump is the first U.S. president since the passing of this law in 1996 to enact Title III of the Helms-Burton Act, which allows for foreign companies that are profiting from confiscated land in Cuba to sue the folks profiting from that confiscated property. So you have a hotel chain, let's say, from Europe, a European hotel chain. Let's say they build a hotel on land that was confiscated by the Cuban government during the beginning of the revolution. According to Title III of the Helms-Burton Act, that individual who owned the land before the revolution would now have the right to sue that European hotel chain for profiting from that confiscated land. So my guess is that is probably why the Imperial Brands decided to announce that they were selling their premium cigar division, and specifically sold off their 50% share in Habanos SA. But they didn't just get rid of their share in Habanos SA. Now understand that cigars in America are under attack, and they have been for a while, not only with relentless taxation, not as bad as countries like Canada, Australia, and the UK have seen, but the taxing of cigars has gone up drastically in the past 10 years. Cigarettes, too. It's also probably due to the FDA ruling in 2016 and the expensive process of getting individual cigars from individual lines reviewed by the FDA. And that's something the entire American market cigar industry is fighting. I do not envy American cigar business owners at this time, because it is a difficult time, and you see things like the PCA being formed, and you see things like you see Rocky Patel giving a lot of interviews and stuff like that, talking about smokers' rights and everything, like the CRA and shit. But real quick, let's just go over some of the assets that were sold in this deal, okay, and who these businesses are that purchased the 50% share in Habanos SA. Okay, so April 27th, 2020, Imperial Brands PLC announces the deal in place to sell their premium cigar assets for 1.33 billion USD in 2 stages. Okay, so two holding companies were formed in March of 2020. Okay, and forgive me, I'm reading off paper here if you couldn't tell. It's just a lot of info. So, two companies involved in this deal: Gemstone Investment Holding Limited and Allied Cigar Corp. SL. Okay, both of them are registered in Hong Kong, possibly for tax reasons. Who really knows what it is? I think it's honestly to shield the identities of the individuals involved with this transaction. It could possibly be just holding companies of that were formed by private financiers, but we'll see. Gemstone is kicking in $200 million for Tabacalera USA, Altadis, and Casa de Monte Cristo and JR Cigar, while Allied Cigar is picking up the rest of the tab for Flor de Copan, which is a Honduras cigar factory, the 50% share in Habanos SA, 50% share in the ICT machine brands, which, if you didn't know, the Cuban cigar brands that are like the Monte Cristo Puritos, the Partagas Chicos, those machine-made cigars are made by ICT, which is a separate company from Habanos SA. It is a separate entity from the premium hand-rolled Cuban cigars and everything like that. And one thing I didn't mention was another thing that Altadis got rid of in Cuba following their acquiring of the 50% share, was that there would be no more machine-bunched hand-rolled cigars, or machine-rolled hand-finished cigars, I should say. So you'll even see that on some of the websites. You'll see, like, a Romeo number 2 being machine-rolled, hand-finished, or hand-wrapped. That's not the case. After 2002 or 2005, I believe it's 2002 though, a cigar is either rolled by machine or it is rolled by hand. And any cigar that is sold under the Habanos SA moniker that doesn't have the ICT logo at the bottom of the box, any cigar we would be smoking most likely was hand bunched and hand rolled, whether it's short filler or long filler. But back to the task in hand here. So Allied Cigar got the Honduras factory. They got the 50% stake in Habanos SA, 50% in ICT. They got 50% in Promotora de Cigarros SL, which is a Spanish distro in ICT cigars. They got Tabacalera de Garcia, which is the world's largest cigar factory in the Dominican Republic. They got the Vega Fina brand. And they got stakes in regional Habanos distributors worldwide via 50% share of Altabana SL, Spanish holding company. Both deals closed third quarter 2020, and the Tabacalera Garcia deal closes 2021. The source for this information was halfwheel.com, and I think that the deal was organized this way. And one interesting thing I want to point out, that we see stakes in regional Habanos distributors worldwide. Who do you think brokered those deals to begin with? Okay, remember what I was saying about Francisco Padron, what he did in 1993? He called up, what he did when he took control of Habano, of Cuba Tobacco. He called up every Habanos distributor around the world, the strongest agents in every market, and he told them he wanted a 50% stake in their company, or that they wouldn't be able to do business anymore. And he brokered 240 contracts in one day as he claims, and I don't see anything in the man that strikes me that he would be a bullshit artist. So I believe him when he says something like that. And we could see that in this deal, that those assets were still intact. Those arrangements were still intact decades later. So that shows how important this man really was and is to the Cuban cigar industry, and what good he did for the Cuban cigar industry. So I want you guys to keep that in mind. And we see that this Allied Cigar holding company, that they are the ones who are acquiring the bulk of the assets. Now, why are two companies involved with this deal? I personally believe that it is due to the Helms-Burton Act Title III that President Trump allowed to take effect. See, Title III was baked into the original law, but every president, every sitting president has used their power to shut down that particular part of the law, and they have kind of allowed the status quo to continue. It is President Trump that, you know, in his whatever he's got going on, I don't even want to talk about Trump, to be honest, but whatever it is, you know, Trump does what Trump wants, and he has allowed Title III to activate, and I believe that is what kicked off this deal to be taking place the way it did. And as far as what can we expect to change, well, I honestly would say at this point, I think the Cubans have realized if it isn't broke, don't fix it. Okay, the Cubans have been making a shit ton of money off of cigars, and I think we'll just see more of the same, to be completely honest. I mean, who really knows at the end of the day? We may see China being favored a little more in, you know, in terms of, like, you know, who produces cigar bands or who does this or who's that. You might see, you know, cigar boxes being produced in China or whatever. I already found a different logo on a Monte Cristo band recently, which tells me that, you know, Vrijdog Premium Printing is not exclusively producing Monte Cristo bands anymore. Maybe they're not producing them at all anymore. We'll have to wait and see what's going on with that. I have not seen anything other than a Vrijdog logo on a Cohiba band. I haven't noticed any difference in any Cohiba bands recently, so I wouldn't worry about that. If I find anything out regarding that, I will certainly inform you guys. But as far as what can we expect to change in the short term, I would not expect anything to change. The reason that these guys buy these, you know, the reason that things like this change hands so much is because they can turn a profit on something that's already established, that they don't really need to do anything. They don't need to do anything to it to generate a profit from it. Okay? I think it has to do with regional laws and policies and whatnot, and maybe something going on in the UK, or maybe this Title III of the Helms-Burton Act scared Imperial Tobacco enough to want them to wash their hands. Because don't forget, Imperial Tobacco has Altadis also. They had Altadis also. Altadis owned quite a bit of stuff, and they also controlled the rights in the U.S. for Monte Cristo, H. Upmann, Romeo and Juliet, and a bunch of the other American versions of Cuban brands, which is why it was speculated that British Imperial Tobacco purchased Altadis, because it would have been easier for them to get those versions, the Cuban versions, should the embargo ever be lifted. It would be easier to get them into the States, since they already owned the American trademarks. It would be easier for them to get the Cuban versions into the American market, or at least it was speculated to be that way. So who really knows what's going to happen? There hasn't been any major information released since this deal was announced. You know, COVID-19 has obviously brought things to a standstill around the world, and I think we'll have to wait a little while to see what might be different, but I honestly don't see much changing at the moment. maybe, hopefully somebody over there likes La Gloria Cubana and Sancho Panza and St. Louis Rey. Because I'll tell you right now, man, I am sick of seeing some of the smaller markers be gutted. And, Sancho Panza, we know that the Non Plus was discontinued last year. And, like I said earlier, the La Gloria Cubana Mano de Oro number 4 has not been produced in about 3 years. So that's a really sad situation if there is no more regular production La Gloria Cubana Vitolas. But I hope that it's just because, Habanos SA has been busy filling ridiculous orders like 50,000 boxes of Serie D number 5 Spanish regional editions. Hopefully we start to see some of the smaller, lesser-known Vitolas or brands make a little bit of a comeback. Hopefully we see a focus on the classic lineups and the classic Vitolas. But odds are it will just be a continuation of more of the same. Lots of small batch, regional and limited editions that are, limited high-end premium releases that generate a lot of income without sacrificing a lot of resource. And we will probably continue to see, incremental price increases like we do see the annual increase every year. And we may see just the same way that Spain gets favored right now for being the large market. We may see, the Cubans' goal of increasing their presence in China by 30%. We may see that realized now. I hope you guys learned something from the feature. I hope you guys have learned a little bit about the framework and the workings of the Cuban tobacco industry under its current centrally planned form. And I hope you guys found this to be interesting, and I thank you for sticking with me. This is one of my more ambitious undertakings. Like I said, it wasn't the easiest thing to do with layman's resources, but I think that I was able to give you guys a decent timeline and present some interesting facts to you guys, as well as form some interesting theories and speculation as to why certain things may have been done the way that they were, and why certain things are happening the way they are. So I'll see you guys again soon. We got a couple of surprises coming up later this summer. I have worked something out with a retailer, and I am currently waiting for a package from them to see what's up with them, and we will be doing a video on that coming up next. And then following that, we will be doing a description of an entire brand, which I will leave that intact for now, and we will revisit in the future. And we'll be doing an entire rating of an entire cigar brand, and we'll see how that format works out. But until that comes, please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Add me on Instagram, cigar_salute. Email and DM links are in the description. And stay well, smoke well, and be well, guys. Take care.